Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Terrible Stories. I exposed my cousin's fake charity at a family gathering. It all started with a message in the family group chat. My aunt, the ever dramatic social coordinator of our sprawling clan, sent out a long and glittery invitation for a special family gathering at her place. She said it was to celebrate a cause close to our hearts, which immediately made me suspicious. My family isn't exactly known for being charitable, not in the organized, altruistic way. We'll help each other move a couch or bring food to a sick relative, but gala style events? Not our thing. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I texted her back to ask what it was about, but all she said was, "You'll see, it's going to be inspiring." That was red flag number one. When the day came, I arrived at her large suburban home to find the driveway jammed with cars and the living room decked out in printed banners and posters. In the middle of it all was my cousin Melissa, beaming like she'd just won an award. She was dressed in a sleek white dress and holding a microphone, speaking to a cluster of relatives about her organization's mission. I barely had time to hang my coat before she spotted me and waved me over. "You're just in time," she said, thrusting a flyer into my hand. It read, "Hearts United International, bringing hope to the helpless." It looked suspiciously like something whipped up on Canva in 30 minutes. Now, I love my family, but I know Melissa. She's always been the type to cut corners, chase clout, and avoid actual work. Her Instagram is full of entrepreneur captions, but I've never seen her keep a real job longer than 3 months. So, the idea of her running a legitimate charity seemed optimistic, to put it kindly. I asked her about it, and she launched into this elaborate story about funding clean water projects in impoverished communities abroad, and how she was partnering with other organizations to maximize impact. But here's the thing. I work in nonprofit administration. I know the laws, the paperwork, the reporting requirements, and as she spoke, I realized she was spouting vague talking points without a shred of verifiable detail. I asked if her charity was registered. She smiled tightly and said, "We're in the process." I asked about her partners. She said they were confidential for now. I asked where donations were going. She pivoted to a story about an orphanage in a remote part of Africa. My suspicion grew tenfold when I overheard her telling someone that 100 of donations go straight to the cause, because that's a line scammers love to use. No real charity operates at zero overhead. By the time dinner was served, my brain was already turning over ways to verify her claims without starting a scene. But part of me knew. If this was what I thought it was, the truth wouldn't stay quiet for long. After that first awkward conversation in the kitchen, I couldn't stop noticing little things about caring hands. It was like the moment I became aware of it, my brain decided to start connecting dots I hadn't even realized were there. For one, my cousin's social media presence was intense. She posted daily about the amazing work her charity was doing, complete with staged photos of her holding boxes of canned goods, smiling with children, always in slightly different locations, but suspiciously often in the same small group, or standing in front of a table covered with envelopes marked donations. I might not have questioned it if I hadn't noticed that, in at least two of the photos, the same dented can of green beans was in the shot. What kind of charity takes the same can to multiple donation drives? Still, I told myself it could be a coincidence. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. But then I started overhearing snippets of conversations between her and other family members. She would talk about how the operational costs are higher than expected, or how sometimes we have to reallocate funds for emergencies, all in this perfectly sympathetic tone that made her sound like a martyr. Yet, I also overheard her on the phone one evening, laughing with someone about a new designer bag she had technically gotten for free, thanks to charity money covering most of it. I remember freezing in the hallway, holding my breath so she wouldn't hear me. That was the first real red flag I couldn't ignore. The more I looked, the stranger things got. I checked the charity's website. It was incredibly vague. There were no posted financials, no official registration number, no clear description of the organization's mission other than helping communities in need. The donate button linked to her personal PayPal. That's when my stomach sank. I knew enough about nonprofits to realize that a legitimate one wouldn't be operating like this. Still, I didn't want to accuse her outright without more proof. She had a reputation in the family for being the ambitious one, and I knew if I came for her without solid evidence, I'd be the one who looked jealous or bitter. The situation started to weigh on me daily, but things escalated when I stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. One night, my aunt asked me to grab an extra serving spoon from the kitchen during dinner. As I opened the drawer, I noticed an envelope sitting on the counter with Caring Hands Donations written on it. It wasn't sealed. I know I shouldn't have looked, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a thick stack of cash and a receipt from a high-end clothing boutique dated the same day. That was it for me. I didn't just suspect anymore, I knew. The question was, what was I going to do with that knowledge? And should I risk turning a quiet suspicion into an open confrontation that could blow up the entire family gathering? In the days following my quiet investigation, I began to notice inconsistencies that I couldn't ignore. At first, it was small things, a date on a printed receipt that didn't align with the story my cousin Alex had told, or the absence of a logo on what was supposedly official charity correspondence. I asked him casually one afternoon over coffee how the donation records were kept, and he launched into an oddly defensive explanation about privacy and protecting donor information. His words didn't match his tone. He was jittery, avoiding eye contact. That's when I decided I needed hard evidence, not just suspicions. I reached out to a friend who works at a nonprofit. I explained the situation without naming Alex, and she walked me through how legitimate charities are registered, the documents they must file, and how donations are tracked. She even showed me a public database where charities are listed. I searched for Alex's organization, it wasn't there. I tried variations of the name, thinking maybe he'd registered it under a different title. Nothing. The pit in my stomach deepened. Meanwhile, my Aunt Alex's mother was proudly telling everyone about how her son had found his calling and was making a difference in the world. She was even hinting that the family should help raise more funds for his cause. The thought of our relatives giving him their hard-earned money for something that might not even exist made my blood boil. The real breaking point came when I spotted an invoice in Alex's bag one evening when he left it open on the dining table. It was from a luxury electronics store. The total? Nearly $2,000. The purchase date was the same week he'd claimed to have bought supplies for underprivileged kids. My hands shook as I took a quick photo of the invoice with my phone. The evidence was stacking up, but confronting him without a plan could backfire spectacularly. That's when the idea began to form. The upcoming family gathering could be the perfect opportunity. Everyone would be there, our parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and if I played my cards right, I could present what I'd found in a way that would make it impossible for him to wriggle out of the truth. Still, I hesitated. This wasn't just exposing a scam, it was going to shatter family trust. I decided to gather just a bit more proof before the big day. I called the supplier Alex had supposedly used for his last shipment of goods. The man on the phone told me he'd never heard of Alex or his charity. That was it. Any lingering doubt I had evaporated. Alex wasn't just bending the truth. He was manufacturing an entire fantasy to siphon money from the people who loved him most. The next step would require timing, tact, and a willingness to be the villain in the family for a while. But I couldn't let him keep doing this. Dinner was always a lively affair in my family, but this time, the air was thick with tension I could almost taste. We gathered around my aunt's long mahogany table, the centerpiece loaded with roasted chicken, potatoes, and a kaleidoscope of vegetables. My cousin Mark sat directly across from me, flashing his politician's smile, the same one he used in his charity's promotional videos. His girlfriend, Vanessa, sat beside him, scrolling through her phone while pretending to listen to the conversation. I could feel the curiosity in the air. My uncle had already hinted earlier that word travels fast in this family, and everyone knew there had been some drama at lunch. My grandmother sat at the head of the table, clearly trying to keep the peace, but her glances darted between me and Mark, like a referee at a boxing match. Small talk drifted around for a while, jobs, vacations, kids. But inevitably, the conversation tilted toward Mark's charity. "So, Mark," my aunt began cheerfully. How's the foundation going? I saw the video you posted about the children's school you're helping in Africa. So inspiring. Mark leaned back in his chair, radiating confidence. It's going really well. We've raised over $20,000 this year alone. We're making a real difference. He glanced at me as if daring me to say something. My fork hovered over my plate, my pulse quickening. I didn't want to cause a scene in front of my grandmother, but every fiber of my being screamed that people deserved to know the truth. My mother, perhaps sensing the impending explosion, jumped in. That's wonderful, Mark. And where exactly does all the money go? I know you travel a lot for the charity. He smiled. Well, a portion goes toward administrative costs. Travel, promotion, networking events. The rest goes directly to the cause. I couldn't help myself. By portion, you mean more than half, right? The table went silent. Knives and forks froze mid-air. Mark's smile twitched, but he kept his voice smooth. Excuse me, I leaned forward. I looked up your tax filings, Mark. According to public records, less than 30% of donations actually reach the programs you claim to fund. The rest? Flights, hotels, dining, consulting fees. My uncle shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should... No, let's hear this, my grandmother said firmly. Her eyes locked on Mark, and for the first time, I saw her suspicion. Mark's face darkened. You have no idea what it takes to run a nonprofit. There are overhead costs, logistics. Overhead costs don't usually include first-class tickets to Paris and five-star resorts, I cut in. Vanessa finally looked up from her phone, glaring at me. You're just jealous of his success. You've always been bitter. That stung, but I wasn't backing down. Jealousy has nothing to do with it. This isn't success. It's exploitation. People donate thinking they're helping children, and instead, they're funding your vacations. My aunt looked between us, clearly rattled. Mark, is this true? His jaw clenched, but he didn't answer right away. The silence was more telling than anything he could have said. My grandmother finally set down her wine glass. Mark, I think after dinner, you and I need to have a serious talk. He glared at me, his composure cracking just enough for me to know I'd struck a nerve. The rest of the meal passed in awkward silence, with only the clinking of silverware to fill the void. I didn't enjoy humiliating him, but the truth had been sitting like a stone in my stomach for months, and now it was out in the open. The room went uncomfortably quiet after my revelation. The clinking of cutlery and the hum of conversation that had filled the air, moments before now, seemed to vanish into thin air. My uncle shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable, while my aunt's eyes darted between me and Daniel, as if she was watching a tennis match she desperately wanted to end. That's a bold accusation, Daniel said, forcing a laugh, but I could see the nervous twitch in his jaw. I'm not accusing, I replied, my voice steady. I'm just stating the facts. The registration number for your charity doesn't exist in any official registry, and the donations people gave you have no documented spending records. Would you like me to pull up the emails you sent out asking for contributions? Several family members looked uneasy, and I could see my grandmother staring at Daniel with a mixture of confusion and disappointment. She had always believed the best in people, especially family, and Daniel had clearly capitalized on that. This is ridiculous, Daniel snapped, his tone losing its friendly facade. You've always been jealous of me. Everyone here knows you just want to make me look bad because you can't stand to see me succeed. The projection was almost laughable. Success, I said sharply. Taking money from people who thought they were helping cancer patients isn't success, it's theft. My cousin Sophie, who had donated a considerable sum to Daniel's so-called charity, spoke up for the first time. Daniel, is this true? I gave you $500. I told my friends about you. They donated too. Her voice cracked and the betrayal in her eyes was palpable. Daniel's shoulders stiffened. It's not what you think, he muttered. I just needed some money to get things going. It was supposed to grow into something real. His justification hung in the air like a bad smell. I realized that, in that moment, his own words were damning enough. The room started to murmur, and even the relatives who normally avoided conflict began whispering to each other. My father cleared his throat. Daniel, he said quietly but firmly. I think you need to explain exactly where that money went. The look on Daniel's face told me he knew he was cornered. His fake charm was gone, replaced by a scowl that made him look smaller somehow. It's none of your business, he spat. That was the wrong thing to say. In an instant, the atmosphere shifted from awkward to accusatory. People wanted answers, and they weren't going to let him wriggle out of it this time. I stayed silent, letting the questions come from all directions. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about him and the lies he'd told. And judging by the way my family was closing in, this was just the beginning of his unraveling. The rest of that evening at the gathering had been awkward, but the fallout didn't truly begin until the following week. My phone started buzzing with texts from various family members. Some curious, some concerned, and some downright angry. A few accused me of humiliating Emily publicly and suggested I should have spoken to her privately first. Others wanted to know more details about what I had found, like how I'd tracked the bank records and where I'd gotten my information. My aunt, Emily's mom, sent me a long, scathing message claiming I had ruined a beautiful holiday and driven a wedge into the family for no good reason. She insisted that Emily's charity was legitimate and that I was just jealous of her popularity and entrepreneurial spirit. But then something interesting started happening. A couple of cousins reached out quietly, saying they had also donated to Emily's so-called charity and had never seen any follow-up about where their money went. One cousin even told me that Emily had approached them asking for a personal cash donation to help with urgent cases, and that she'd seemed evasive when they asked for receipts. Word spread quickly, and soon Emily found herself facing an unexpected wave of skepticism from people who, just a week earlier, had been praising her. I stayed out of the direct fights, letting the facts I'd presented speak for themselves. But I could tell Emily was feeling the pressure. She posted a defensive video on her social media, claiming she was being targeted by jealous family members, and that she was in the process of registering her charity officially, which was why the funds had been temporarily stored in her personal account. The problem was the video backfired. People started asking in the comments why she had been running the charity for over a year without proper registration, and why so much money had been spent on luxury items. Screenshots of her vacation posts, expensive outfits, and even her new car began circulating online. Emily went quiet for a few days after that. I thought maybe she was finally realizing the game was over, but then I found out she was planning something that could make the entire situation explode. By the time dessert was being served, I'd already noticed my cousin getting quieter. Her animated hand gestures had shrunk into small, nervous movements, and her fake smile kept twitching as she glanced toward the kitchen every few minutes. It was like she was waiting for something or bracing for impact. I didn't have to wait long to find out why. Aunt Linda, who'd been uncharacteristically silent since my little cost breakdown earlier, suddenly cleared her throat. The clinking of silverware against plates stopped almost instantly. Sophie, she said, her tone deceptively polite, I've been looking at your charity's Instagram. You posted that picture of the children in Peru receiving the blankets. Only those are the exact same photos from a UNICEF campaign in 2019. My cousin's fork froze midair. She stammered something about partnering with UNICEF, but Aunt Linda wasn't done. Funny thing, she continued, pulling out her phone, UNICEF doesn't list your charity as a partner anywhere on their site. In fact, I emailed their regional office last night, and they've never heard of you. There was a sharp intake of breath from the table. I could feel the shift everyone had gone from humoring Sophie to actively questioning her. My cousin's eyes darted toward me, and I saw it panic. This is ridiculous, she snapped, trying to laugh it off. Why are you all ganging up on me? Don't you care about helping people? It might have been convincing if she didn't look like she was about to bolt from the table. Then, as if fate decided to join in, my uncle pulled out his phone and started reading out loud from the charity's GoFundMe description. All proceeds go directly to the children, he read. Except according to your public filings, Sophie, 78 of donations went to administrative expenses, which is you. Her voice wavered. I work full-time on this. That's my salary. But the damage was done. You could see the image of the benevolent do-gooder shattering right there in front of everyone. And the best part? I wasn't even the one holding the sledgehammer anymore. The weeks following the disastrous family gathering were a whirlwind of fallout, confrontations, and awkward silences. News of Ethan's charity scam spread far beyond our family. Apparently, someone had posted about it in a local Facebook group, and within days, mutual friends, neighbors, and even people from his old high school were commenting. My phone buzzed constantly with messages, some from family members who were furious with me for embarrassing Ethan, and others thanking me for speaking up. Ethan himself went silent. No texts, no calls. But his mother, my aunt, made sure I knew how she felt. She called me one evening, her voice trembling between anger and desperation, accusing me of destroying her son's future and claiming that everyone makes mistakes, and I should have handled it privately. I calmly reminded her that asking for donations under false pretenses wasn't just a mistake, it was fraud. That shut her up for about 5 seconds before she hung up on me. Meanwhile, some relatives started quietly distancing themselves from Ethan. My uncle refused to speak to him, my grandmother stopped sending him money, and even a few of his closest cousins unfriended him online. But there was also a small group, mostly his immediate family and a few enablers, who doubled down on defending him. They insisted I had blown things out of proportion, and that families shouldn't turn on each other over money. I found myself caught in the middle of a cold war. At family events, conversations stopped when I entered the room. Some people avoided me altogether, while others pulled me aside to ask if I had any more proof. The tension reached a breaking point when I learned that Ethan had tried to start a new fundraiser, this time for what he called a community arts project. But instead of posting about it publicly, he was contacting people directly, asking for private contributions so haters wouldn't sabotage him again. That was when I realized he hadn't learned a single thing. I debated for days whether to step in again or let him dig his own grave. Part of me was exhausted from the drama, but another part couldn't stand the thought of him tricking more people, especially now that his tactics were even sneakier. I didn't have to decide for long, though, because a familiar name popped up in my messages, someone who had just given him money and was starting to suspect something was off. It was happening again, and I knew I had a choice to make. The moment the video ended, the room erupted into chaos. My cousin was shouting, his face turning red as he tried to talk over the noise, insisting I had twisted everything. But the evidence was undeniable. Not just my words, but his own voice admitting to keeping the money. Several family members stood up, demanding explanations. My aunt, his mother, was trembling with a mix of embarrassment and rage. "How could you do this to your own family?" she shouted, though it wasn't entirely clear if she meant his actions or mine for exposing them. My cousin's partner tried to defend him, saying it was just a misunderstanding and that he meant to use the money eventually. But by then, the room was past the point of believing half-hearted excuses. My uncle, usually quiet, stepped forward and said in a cold voice, "You stole from these people. You lied to all of us." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had felt that night. Then, in a surprising twist, my grandmother, the oldest in the family and the one everyone respected, stood up. "You have shamed this family," she said, her voice low but cutting. "You will return every cent, or you will not be welcome here again." That was the final blow. My cousin, visibly cornered, muttered something about paying it back, but no one looked convinced. I could feel the mixture of satisfaction and tension in the room. I had done what I came to do, but the fallout was far from over. People began talking in smaller groups, some glaring at me, others avoiding eye contact altogether. I knew I had just changed family dynamics forever, and there was no going back. The party broke up early, and I left without saying goodbye. My phone was already buzzing with texts, some praising me, others accusing me of being cruel. I didn't know which stung more, the accusations or the fact that deep down I wasn't sure if I'd done the right thing, or just the necessary thing. The days after the reunion were a whirlwind of conversations, rumors, and, strangely, a few thank yous from relatives who had apparently been suspicious of Erica's so-called charity for years, but never had the nerve to say anything. My phone rang, constantly. Some calls were supportive, others less so. Aunt Margaret, Erica's mother, left a particularly scathing voicemail calling me a family traitor who should have kept their mouth shut. But then, there were the quieter voices like Uncle David, who told me he had been pressured into donating more than he could afford, or cousin Lila, who admitted she'd been guilt-tripped into giving a sizable chunk of her savings. The fallout hit Erica hard. The charity's social media pages vanished overnight, and the glossy photos of school projects disappeared from her Instagram. Rumor had it that some donors were demanding refunds, and she was scrambling to make excuses. I didn't know if there'd be legal consequences, but from the hushed conversations I overheard in the following weeks, I suspected there might be. I also learned that Erica had left town for a while, supposedly to focus on herself. At first, I felt a strange mixture of relief and guilt. I hadn't planned to humiliate her so publicly. I just couldn't watch her lie to everyone's faces. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she had chosen this path. She built her house of cards. I just pointed out that the wind was coming. Our next family gathering, months later, was notably more subdued. People were polite, almost overly so. No one mentioned Erica, though I caught a few glances when I walked into the room. In a way, the atmosphere felt lighter, like a tension had been lifted. It was strange. As for me, I decided to channel the whole ordeal into something constructive. I began volunteering at an actual registered charity in town, one with transparent accounting and real projects. It felt good to help, without the cloud of lies hanging over everything. Every now and then, though, I'd catch myself wondering about Erica. Was she still trying to run some scam elsewhere? Had she learned anything from all this? I honestly didn't know. Maybe she'd hate me forever, but I could live with that. Because deep down, I knew I'd done the right thing. Sometimes the truth burns bridges, but maybe those bridges were never worth crossing in the first place. And if the price of honesty was a few awkward family dinners, well, I could handle that. After all, family might not always like the truth, but they deserve to hear it.